I had dreamed of that porch for years. Not the glossy perfection of a real estate ad, not the architect's neat lines on a blueprint, but the kind of dream that grows slowly inside you. Warm mornings with coffee steaming against the chill, a dog padding lazily across sunlit floorboards, the sound of laughter spilling out of a kitchen that finally belonged to me. When the keys dropped into my palm, it felt like a small miracle. The realtor smiled knowingly, as if she had seen this look before. That stunned expression people wear when everything they've fought for finally makes sense. Crossing the threshold, the air inside was impossibly still. It smelled faintly of fresh paint, but beneath it lingered something older, a quiet, velvety dust that only old houses seem to keep. Light streamed through tall windows, pooling across the wooden floorboards in golden squares, as though the house itself had decided to welcome me. The wallpaper was faded, patterned faintly with flowers, curling at the edges where time had pressed too hard. The stairs creaked when I set foot on them, not like a protest, but like a whisper. You're here now. I've been waiting. For days, I lived inside a perfect picture. I unpacked carefully, almost reverently, placing each plate and book as though they could anchor me to this new beginning. The neighbors waved from their porches. The bakery down the street remembered my order by the second visit. At dusk, I'd stand on that porch, listening to the street sink into silence, and the stillness wrapped me in the kind of safety I thought I'd lost forever. But houses have ways of testing the people who live in them. They keep secrets the way wood keeps scars. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, those secrets slip through the seams. It began so gently I almost missed it. A curtain that refused to hang straight no matter how I pinned it. A stair that groaned with every step, like an old friend insisting on being noticed. Harmless quirks, the kind of eccentricities you forgive in a place that's lived longer than you. Then came the sounds. At first I told myself it was nothing. Wood settling, pipes shifting, the ordinary vocabulary of an old house. But this was different. At night, when the world outside held its breath, a soft tapping began inside the walls. Not random, not frantic, rhythmic, deliberate, like a message I couldn't decipher. Sometimes air whispered through the vents, even though the system was off, brushing cold against the back of my neck. And then there was the smell, faint, sweet, sour, a scent that pricked at the edges of memory but refused to name itself. I wanted to dismiss it. I told myself it was the charm of the old place, that it would fade with time. But affection has a way of turning into unease. The neighbors came by, casserole dishes in hand, smiling politely. Yet beneath the friendliness, something else lingered. A pause in their sentences, a glance that lingered too long on my house, a name nearly spoken and then swallowed again. Mrs. Langley from number 7 was the boldest. She pressed a folded paper towel into my hand one afternoon, her eyes sharp and searching. "People don't move in without looking too closely," she said. I laughed, because laughter is sometimes the only shield you have, but the sound rang hollow in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked. Her hand lingered on my arm, cool and firm, her gaze steady. "You'll see," she whispered. And then she turned away. That night, I sat alone in the living room, the floral wallpaper breathing quietly around me. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, the quirks of age, the nerves of a new start. But the air felt different, heavier, as though the house had been listening. And for the first time since I'd moved in, I realized maybe it had. The days that followed unfolded with a strange, fragile beauty. I cooked in my new kitchen with the windows open, letting sunlight wash the counters. I arranged bookshelves slowly, savoring the small ritual of claiming each corner. On the surface, life was exactly as I had dreamed it. But dreams have cracks, and sometimes, through those cracks, something else seeps in. At first it was subtle, the sense that the house followed its own secret schedule, a creak on the stairs at the same hour every night, a sigh of air drifting through the vents like an invisible breath, the faint tapping that returned again and again, measured and patient, as though the house itself had learned how to keep time. Then the smell grew stronger, sweet, metallic and sour all at once, a scent that clung to the edges of thought, I tried to scrub it from memory, to pin it on musty wood or old paint, but each time I inhaled, the taste of it spread across my tongue like a question that had no answer. I started searching for distractions, long walks, coffee runs, anything that pulled me from the quiet pulse of the house. Still, the unease followed me back, clinging to my clothes, my skin, the soles of my shoes. One evening, while shifting boxes in the attic, I found a photograph wedged behind a stack of brittle newspapers. The edges were chewed with time, the surface spotted and faded, but the image was clear enough, a family on the porch that now felt like mine. Their smiles were practiced, neat, the kind you wear when someone tells you to say cheese, but their eyes carried something else: urgency, exhaustion, maybe even fear. I placed the photograph aside, promising myself I would keep track of whatever the house offered me, a promise that in time would become its own kind of trap. Nights grew heavier. I lay awake listening to the impossible, scratches where no rat could run, drips where no pipe could leak, rhythms that seemed too intentional to be random. I invented stories to explain them, harmless ones, because harmless stories are easier to live with. Old wood, restless air, the size of a tired house. But even my stories began to betray me. One afternoon, a workman came to fix a door hinge. He was the sort of man who carried tools with quiet confidence, who knew the way wood should feel under his hands. Yet as he moved through the kitchen, he paused, knocking lightly on the table before speaking. "Do you ever hear things?" he asked. I blinked. "What do you mean?" "Odd hours, sounds in the walls. Sometimes when I work on places like this, it feels like there's more." His eyes met mine, serious, unblinking, like a presence. He shrugged, forcing a laugh, but the sound fell flat. The weight of his words landed in me like a stone. From then on, I noticed everything with sharper focus. The pockets of air that pressed colder against my skin, the dust that gathered in patterns that looked disturbed, as though something had shifted where nothing should move. The smell, stronger now, metallic and wrong, curling into the fabric of the curtains, the threads of my clothing, the back of my throat. My phone buzzed more often those days, polite messages from neighbors, reminders from friends, offers for repairs. But then came the messages that felt heavier. A number I didn't recognize, a voice on the other end, vague and hesitant, asking if I was the new owner. Mrs. Langley checking if I was home, her tone thin, strained, as though she were speaking around something she dared not say. I told myself not to dwell, not to open doors best left closed. But then came the knock. It started gently, almost polite, then grew sharper, more insistent, each strike echoing through the house with a rhythm that made my chest tighten. When I opened the door, the man standing there wore the kind of face trained to deliver bad news gently. His voice was soft, careful, the calm of someone who had seen lives collapse under the weight of a single sentence. "You're the new owner?" he asked. I nodded. The silence between us stretched thin. His eyes searched the house behind me, as if measuring the air, testing the walls. Then he said it. "Did you know there's a body decomposing inside your walls?" The words did not belong to sunlight and fresh paint. They belonged to shadows, to graveyards, to the kind of silence that buries more than just sound. And in that moment, the house stopped feeling like a home. It became something else entirely. The words lingered long after the door closed. A body, decomposing, inside your walls. They didn't belong to the sunlight on my floorboards, or the fresh paint I had breathed in like hope, or the laughter I had imagined echoing through the rooms. They didn't belong to coffee mornings on the porch or neighbors waving across the street. They belonged to somewhere else entirely, somewhere dark, heavy, and irreversible. I told myself he was wrong, that it was a mistake, a test maybe, some cruel joke or experiment to see how I'd react. But the look in his eyes, steady, practiced, sorrowful, told me he wasn't lying. That night, the house was too quiet. The stillness pressed down on me like weight, like the air itself had thickened. I lay in bed listening, waiting, measuring the spaces between the sounds. A creak, a whisper of movement, a drip that didn't come from any faucet I could find. Every sound was sharper now, more sinister, as if the walls had found new ways to speak. Sleep became something I could only touch in fragments. I would drift off, only to wake at 2 in the morning, heart pounding at the faint scrape behind the plaster. I told myself stories, rats, pipes, wood settling, harmless explanations. But the words of the man at the door bled through every excuse. A body. In your walls. Days blurred. I found myself staring too long at the wallpaper, searching for patterns that weren't there. I caught the scent of that sweetness again, stronger now, sour at the edges, metallic like blood pressed against rust. I tried to scrub it from the air with open windows, with candles, with sprays that promised freshness. But it lingered. It clung. One evening I was carrying a box to the attic when something slid loose from the rafters above, a thin envelope, brittle with age. Inside was another photograph, the same family as before still standing on the porch, but this time their smiles had slipped, their faces gaunt, shadows ringing their eyes. The children looked directly into the camera, their gazes hollow, too knowing for their age. I set it aside, hands trembling, but the image burned behind my eyes. The neighbors' kindness began to feel like pity. Their smiles seemed rehearsed, their words chosen with careful restraint. Whenever the conversation bent toward my house, their voices faltered, their eyes darted elsewhere. It was as though the entire street was in on a secret, and I was the fool still fumbling in the dark. Mrs. Langley passed me on the sidewalk one morning, her grocery bag heavy in her arms. She stopped, studying me the way a doctor studies a patient who doesn't yet know the diagnosis. "You look tired," she said softly. "I don't sleep much," I admitted. Her hand brushed mine, fleeting but deliberate. "No one does. Not in there." I wanted to demand answers, to shout, to shake her until she gave me the truth, but my voice caught in my throat, tangled in fear. She walked away before I could speak. That night the noises grew bolder, not just taps and sighs, but shuffles, drags, as though something heavy shifted inside the walls. I pressed my ear against the plaster, breath held, and for a moment I thought I heard it. Not movement, not settling wood, but a sound unmistakably human. A low, humming exhale. I stumbled back, heart pounding, every rational thought collapsing in on itself. The house was no longer just shelter. It was alive. And it was keeping something I wasn't ready to face. The house changed after that night. Or maybe it was me. Once you've been told a body is inside your walls, you can't unhear it. You can't unsee the way shadows stretch longer than they should, or the way silence gathers in corners like dust. Every creak became a confession. Every breath of air against my skin felt intentional. I tried to ignore it. I filled the rooms with music, let the radio play from morning until night. But the house swallowed the sound, muffling it until only the beat of my own pulse kept me company. The smell worsened, no longer faint, no longer ignorable. It clung to the curtains, seeped into the floorboards, lived in my clothes, sweet and rotten, metallic and sour. A smell that carried weight, memory, accusation. I scrubbed every surface until my hands cracked. I opened windows, let the wind rush through until the drapes snapped like flags. Still it lingered. The house would not let go. Sleep became impossible. I would jolt awake to sounds too deliberate to be accidents, a drag across the floorboards above, a knock against the wall behind my headboard, a sigh that rose and fell in rhythm with my own breathing. One night, I swore I heard humming. Faint, low, threaded through the walls like a lullaby forgotten by time. I pressed my ear to the plaster, trembling, and for a moment I could almost make out a tune, something childlike, something wrong. I stumbled back, whispering to myself, "It's not real. It can't be real." But the words didn't comfort me. They felt like lies. The neighbors kept their distance now. Their smiles were thinner, their greetings clipped. When I passed them on the street, conversations stilled, eyes shifted away. I could feel it in the air, the weight of something unspoken pressing down on the entire block. Mrs. Langley crossed paths with me again, her face pale, her voice low. "You should leave," she whispered. I wanted to argue. I wanted to ask her why, to demand the truth. But the words dissolved before I could speak. She gripped my arm, her fingers cold and firm. The house keeps what it's given. Don't let it keep you. Her warning haunted me more than the noises, more than the smell, because she said it like she knew, like she had seen it before. The days bled together. I ate less, slept hardly at all. My reflection in the mirror was gaunt, hollow-eyed, a stranger peering back at me. The house seemed to notice my unraveling, responding in kind. Doors left ajar though I'd closed them, lights flickering without cause, drafts that slipped beneath the floor like whispers rising from below, and always the smell. Stronger now, heavier, like the house was exhaling its secret, daring me to breathe it in. One evening I sat on the stairs, too tired to move, too wired to rest. The silence pressed against me, thick and deliberate. And then came the knock. Not at the front door this time, but from within the wall beside me. 3 slow, steady raps. I froze, every muscle locked, listening. The air around me tightened, heavy with expectation. Then, nothing. I pressed my palm flat against the plaster. It was cold, too cold. And in the stillness, I understood something I hadn't dared admit until then. The house wasn't just keeping a secret. It was keeping me. Denial only works for so long. I tried to carry on as if life was normal, but the house refused to let me. Its presence pressed against me every hour, steady and patient, like water wearing down stone. The smell was unbearable now. No candle could mask it. No open window could sweep it away. It clung to me even outside, as though the house had marked me, claimed me. When people at the bakery leaned back politely, or neighbors offered quick, shallow smiles, I knew they smelled it too. Not on the house, but on me. That was when fear began to twist into something worse. Curiosity. I needed to know. What lay behind the walls? What exactly had been sealed away with plaster and paint? Was it truly a body, or something else the cop hadn't dared name? I started listening differently, not just to the sounds, but to the rhythms. The tapping at night wasn't random. It followed patterns like a heartbeat. The sighs through the vents seemed timed to my breathing, and the humming. The humming returned, faint and childlike, slipping through the walls when the rest of the house was still. I caught myself moving through the rooms with deliberate slowness, as though I were being watched. I pressed my ear against door frames, tapped at panels, even traced the seams of the wallpaper with my fingers, searching for the hollow places where secrets hide. Everywhere I looked, the house gave me fragments. A nail that looked newer than the rest. A patch of wallpaper that didn't match the age around it. Dust unsettled in patterns that felt purposeful, as though something had been shifting where nothing should move. Sleep abandoned me completely. At night I sat in the living room with the lights off, waiting, listening. My coffee grew cold in my hands as the hours bled into each other. Sometimes the tapping began at midnight, sometimes at 2. Once it came at 3 sharp knocks, answered by silence that felt almost smug. The house wasn't just holding something, it was speaking, and I was starting to understand its language. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled a chair beneath the attic hatch, climbed up and forced myself into the narrow space. Dust coated my skin, clinging to my throat. The single bulb overhead flickered, swinging gently as though stirred by breath. In the far corner, tucked behind the beams, I found another photograph. This one was worse than the rest. The same family, still on the porch, but now their faces were different. Drawn, haunted, their smiles completely gone. The father's hand gripped the mother's shoulder too tightly. The children no longer looked like children at all. I shoved it back into the box, my pulse hammering. But even with it hidden, I could feel their eyes on me. The attic creaked. The bulb swung harder, casting long, broken shadows across the beams. And then came the sound, a low, dragging noise, like something shifting deep inside the walls. I scrambled down, slamming the hatch shut, heart in my throat. From that night on, the house no longer felt like it was keeping me at a distance. It felt like it was pulling me closer. The days slipped from me. Hours bled together like watercolors, edges blurred, nothing holding firm. I no longer kept track of time. I only kept track of the house. Every sound was catalogued, every smell measured against the last. I traced the walls with my hands as though they were skin, searching for the pulse beneath. When the humming returned, faint and fragile, I pressed my ear against the plaster and closed my eyes, trying to catch every note. It was never clear enough to be a song, but it carried something unmistakably human. I began to speak back, whispering into the walls at night, asking questions I didn't want answered. Who are you? Why are you here? What do you want from me? The silence that followed was heavier than any response could have been. The house had become my world, my captor, my obsession. I saw it in the faces of my neighbors too. Their pity had shifted into something colder, fear maybe, or suspicion. Conversations ended when I approached. Curtains twitched when I passed. It was as though the street itself had turned its back on me. Only Mrs. Langley remained the same, watchful, quiet, carrying knowledge she wouldn't share. One evening, I found her tending to her garden, her hands deep in the soil, her face lined with shadows that didn't come from the setting sun. "You knew," I said. My voice sounded foreign, thin and sharp in the evening air. She looked up slowly, her eyes searching mine, and for a moment I thought she might finally tell me the truth. But she only wiped her hands on her apron, her movements deliberate, careful. "Some things," she said softly, "are heavier than words." "That's not enough," I snapped, my voice trembling. "There's something in this house. You knew before I moved in. Why won't you tell me?" Her gaze hardened. She stepped closer, lowering her voice until it was nearly a whisper. "Because knowing won't save you. It didn't save the others." The words landed like stones in my chest. The others. I wanted to demand more, to shake the truth out of her. But her eyes, tired, haunted, resolute, told me she had already said as much as she dared. She turned back to her garden, her silence louder than any confession. That night, the house felt different. The walls seemed to breathe louder, closer, as if stirred by my desperation. The smell thickened, pressing against my lungs. I walked from room to room, whispering again into the plaster, begging this unseen presence to reveal itself. And then, for the first time, it answered. A single knock, sharp, clear. From inside the wall, directly behind me. I froze, breath caught in my throat. The air around me seemed to tighten, thick with anticipation. My hand lifted on its own, trembling, and I knocked back, 3 times. Silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Then came the reply. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I stumbled back, heart hammering. The walls weren't just keeping secrets anymore. They were speaking, communicating. And I realized, with a chill that settled deep into my bones, the house didn't want me to leave. It wanted me to listen. Sleep abandoned me completely. The night stretched on like corridors with no end, each hour heavy with sounds I could no longer dismiss. The tapping was constant now, patient and deliberate, as though someone inside the walls was marking time with me. The humming grew bolder, weaving through the silence until it felt like the house itself was singing. Sometimes it sounded close, just beyond the plaster. Other times it floated from the vents, as though carried through the very lungs of the building. I began to lose track of what was real. Shadows stretched strangely in the corners of rooms, bending against the direction of light. Drafts curled around my ankles when no window was open. The wallpaper seemed to shift under my gaze, its floral patterns writhing into shapes I couldn't name. I told myself it was exhaustion, sleep deprivation, my mind inventing horrors where none existed. But deep down, I knew better. The house was no longer content with whispers. It wanted me to see. One night I awoke to the sound of footsteps above me, slow, deliberate, crossing the attic where I had been too afraid to return. I lay frozen, heart hammering, counting each creak of the boards. When the steps stopped, I waited in silence, every muscle straining. Then came the unmistakable sound of something dragging, heavy, reluctant, as though a body were being pulled across the floor. I sat up, trembling, unable to move. My throat was dry, my voice caught. When I finally forced a whisper, "Who's there?" the attic answered with a long, drawn-out creak and then silence. Morning brought no comfort. The sunlight looked different now, too thin, too pale, like it couldn't reach me fully inside these walls. I wandered the rooms in a haze, listening, waiting, dreading. The house felt smaller somehow, the ceilings lower, the rooms pressing closer. The neighbors avoided me entirely. Curtains shut when I stepped outside. Greetings died on their lips. Even the bakery, once warm and welcoming, offered only quick exchanges, eyes darting away. The entire town seemed to know something I didn't, and their silence pressed harder than any sound inside the walls. I clung to scraps of normalcy, washing dishes, folding clothes, watering the plants on the porch. But every action felt hollow, staged, as though I were pretending to live a life that had already ended. That evening, as I stood in the kitchen, the humming returned, louder this time, clearer, and for the first time I recognized it. A lullaby, simple, repetitive, the kind sung to children to soothe them to sleep. My chest tightened, my eyes burning. It was too human to dismiss, too deliberate to ignore. I pressed my hands against the wall, the plaster cold beneath my palms. "What do you want?" I whispered. The answer came in a slow, deliberate knock. 1. Pause. 2. Pause. 3. And then silence. I staggered back, the meaning clear. It wasn't just sound, it was acknowledgement. The house had been waiting for me to ask, and now that I had, there would be no going back. The house no longer waited for nightfall. Its whispers followed me through the day. Taps came while I cooked breakfast, steady and deliberate, echoing through the walls in a rhythm too controlled to be random. The humming drifted through the vents when the sun was high, weaving into the sound of traffic outside. Even the smell, sweet, rancid, metallic, grew stronger in daylight, as if sunlight only gave it more room to spread. I stopped pretending this was exhaustion. Sleep deprivation alone could not explain the fingerprints I found on the dust of the attic hatch, prints too small to be my own. It couldn't explain the way my keys moved from table to counter when I hadn't touched them, or the way doors I had locked stood ajar in the morning. At night, the house pressed harder. The footsteps above me returned, dragging sounds trailing after them, punctuated by long silences that pressed against my chest like weight. Once I woke to the sound of breathing, not my own but low and steady, filling the room like a second heartbeat. I lay still, forcing myself not to look until the air grew cold enough to sting my skin. I began speaking aloud more often, my voice trembling through the rooms. Sometimes I begged, sometimes I demanded, "Show yourself, leave me alone, tell me what you want." And sometimes the house answered, a knock after my words, a shift in the air sudden and deliberate, like the pause between inhale and exhale. Once in the dead of night, I swore I felt a hand brush against my ankle, light, fleeting, but undeniably real. I stopped trusting my own senses. Shadows moved where light should have held them still. My reflection in the mirror lingered a second longer than I did. I caught glimpses of figures at the edge of my vision, standing in doorways, watching from corners. But when I turned, there was nothing. There was... The neighbors' silence became unbearable. Their closed curtains, their turned backs, their clipped greetings. They knew. I could see it in their faces, hear it in the hesitation before their voices broke away. They carried the weight of a story they refused to tell me. One night, desperate, I walked to Mrs. Langley's house and knocked. She opened the door slowly, her face pale, her eyes wary. "You have to tell me," I said, my voice cracked. "I can't live like this anymore. What happened in that house?" She looked past me toward it, her gaze distant, haunted. "You don't want to know," she whispered. "I do," I insisted. "I need to." Her lips pressed tight, her shoulders tense. For a moment, I thought she would close the door, but instead, she leaned forward, her words low, sharp, trembling. "Some walls are built to keep things out. Yours were built to keep something in. The door shut before I could reply. I stood on her porch, trembling, her words ringing in my ears. When I turned back toward my house, the windows glared at me like eyes. And in that moment, I understood. I wasn't just living in that house anymore. I was being kept. Mrs. Langley's words followed me back across the street. Some walls are built to keep things out. Yours were built to keep something in. They echoed louder than the creaks of the stairs, louder than the groans of the floorboards, louder than the steady hum of the vents. The house seemed to absorb them, repeating them in its own language of knocks and whispers, as though confirming what she had said. I could no longer pretend I was imagining this. The house had a past and I was tangled in it. I began searching. In the attic I opened every box, sifted through stacks of yellowed paper, brittle receipts, fragments of letters half-eaten by dust. Most were ordinary, bills, photographs, trinkets that had lost their owners, but some felt heavier, charged with a weight I couldn't name. I found a child's shoe, cracked with age, the leather stiff and brittle. I found a notebook with only one page intact, scribbled with words that bled into each other, as though written in haste. Don't trust the silence. And then there were the photographs. Always the same family, always on the porch, their smiles fading with each new discovery. In the last one I found, their faces were blank, as if the camera had captured shadows instead of people. I took them downstairs, laid them across the table, studied them like clues. The family had lived here. They had known the walls, the smell, the presence, and something had happened to them, something the neighbors refused to speak of. The phone rang that evening, a number I didn't recognize. I let it buzz in my hand before answering, my voice trembling. A pause, then a low, strained voice. "You should leave." "Who is this?" I demanded. The line clicked dead. I stood in the kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the photographs spread before me. The house seemed to hold its breath. That night the dreams came. I saw the family from the photographs, standing in the living room where I now slept fitfully on the couch. They didn't speak. They only stared at me, their eyes hollow, their faces pale. When I tried to move, I found I couldn't, as though the air had thickened around me, pinning me in place. I woke, gasping, drenched in sweat, the humming louder than ever, filling the walls like a choir of voices buried too deep. I stumbled into the kitchen, desperate for water, for clarity. That's when I noticed the wallpaper peeling in a corner I hadn't seen before. Hands trembling, I pulled at it. Beneath the floral pattern was something else. Faint writing scratched into the plaster, half hidden, half erased by time. I leaned close, my breath fogging against the wall, and read, "They never left." The words sliced through me. I stumbled back, heart racing, my eyes darting around the room. The wall stood silent, heavy, waiting. But I knew. I wasn't alone in that house. Not then, not ever. The message on the wall would not leave me. They never left. It followed me through every room, etched itself into every thought. I whispered it to myself at night, tracing the words in the air like a prayer or a curse. The house seemed almost proud of it. The knocks grew louder, the humming clearer, the smell sharper. It was as though acknowledging the words had unlocked something, loosened the house's grip on its secret, and tightened its grip on me. I tried the neighbors again. I caught Mr. Whitaker from across the street unloading groceries from his car. "Do you know anything about the family who lived here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He froze, his hand still on a paper bag. For a moment I thought he would answer, but then he shook his head too quickly, his eyes darting away. "Best not to dig," he muttered. "Best to move on." His wife appeared at the door, calling his name. He disappeared inside without another word, leaving me standing alone with the silence. Later that evening I passed two neighbors whispering on the sidewalk. They hushed as soon as they saw me, but not before I caught a fragment. "Like the others. The others." The words pressed against me like cold fingers. How many before me had stood in this same place, asking the same questions? How many had ignored the warnings until it was too late? The house offered no answers, only more fragments. A loose floorboard in the hallway revealed a rusted key, small and ornate, its teeth jagged and unfamiliar. I held it in my palm, turning it over, wondering what it once unlocked. Behind a cupboard in the kitchen, I found faint carvings etched into the wood. At first I thought they were scratches, but when I leaned closer, I saw the shapes of letters, names, half-formed, unfinished. I could make out only one clearly. Clara. I whispered the name aloud, and the house seemed to stir, the air tightening around me, colder, heavier. That night the dreams returned. Clara was there this time, a girl with hollow eyes, her hair hanging in limp strands, her voice no more than a whisper. I couldn't make out the words, but her lips moved urgently again and again as though trying to warn me. When I woke, the smell was suffocating, stronger than ever. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat. I staggered to the bathroom, gripping the sink, staring at my reflection. My face was pale, drawn, my eyes ringed in shadows. I hardly recognized myself. And then, in the mirror, I saw it. Not my reflection. Not fully. For a heartbeat, another face hovered behind mine, gaunt, hollow, watching. I spun around, but the room was empty. The house hummed low, a sound that crawled along the walls like laughter. I pressed my hands to my ears, shaking my head, whispering, "This isn't real. This isn't real." But the smell, the sound, the weight of the walls pressing closer, told me otherwise. The family had never left, and neither, I feared, would I. The house no longer bothered with subtlety. The knocks came in daylight now, sharp and deliberate, rattling the frames of pictures I had tried to hang to make this place feel like mine. The humming filled the air at all hours, a low and ceaseless thread that wove itself into the rhythm of my breath. The smell grew so strong I could taste it, copper and rot, clinging to the back of my throat until food turned to ash on my tongue. I had stopped eating much. I had stopped sleeping entirely. The house had hollowed me out, shaping me into something that fit its silence. Neighbors no longer waved. They crossed the street to avoid me, their eyes fixed anywhere but on mine. Curtains stayed drawn even in the day. Conversations stilled when I approached. It wasn't just pity anymore, it was fear. The house seemed to relish their retreat. Its presence swelled in their absence, filling every corner, every breath, until I felt it pressing against my skin. I began to notice the patterns more clearly. The knocks came in threes. The humming rose when I was most tired, when my defenses were weakest. The cold spots always appeared in the same places: the hallway near the attic door, the corner of the living room, the base of the stairs. As though the house had pressure points, places where its secret pressed hardest against the skin of reality. One evening, desperate for answers, I returned to the attic. The air was thick with dust, the bulb swinging overhead like a pendulum. I sifted through boxes until my hands shook with exhaustion. At the bottom of one, beneath a stack of brittle linens, I found another photograph. This one was different. The family wasn't on the porch. They were inside, sitting in the very living room where I now spent my nights awake. Their faces were pale, their expressions strained, their eyes fixed on the camera as though forced into stillness. Behind them, in the shadows of the wallpaper, a faint outline lingered, something tall, indistinct, standing between them and the wall. I dropped the photo, my hands trembling. The attic creaked, the bulb flickered, and from deep within the walls, something knocked, slow, steady, closer than it had ever been before. I scrambled down the ladder, slamming the hatch shut, my chest heaving. The house seemed to hum in response, low and satisfied, as though amused by my fear. That night, I didn't dream. I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with the photographs spread before me, the word Clara carved into the cupboard door, the shoe, the notebook, the scraps of a story no one would tell me. And I realized something that chilled me deeper than anything yet. The family hadn't left. They were still here, and the house wasn't just keeping them. It was keeping me, too. The house no longer whispered. It spoke. The knocks rattled the walls with such force that dust shook from the ceiling. The humming rose and fell like breath, sometimes soft, sometimes so loud it drowned out my thoughts. And the smell, thick, sour, metallic, clung to everything I touched. No matter how many times I scrubbed, the rot returned, deeper, sharper, as though it had soaked into the bones of the house itself. I began to feel it in my body, my chest heavy, my skin cold, my head pounding with a rhythm that matched the knocks. My reflection grew stranger each day, gaunt cheeks, sunken eyes, a face that looked like it belonged more to the walls than to me. At night, I stopped sitting in silence. I spoke to the house. I begged. I cursed. I whispered into the vents, into the plaster, into the cracks of the floorboards. "Why me?" I asked. "Why won't you leave me alone?" Sometimes it answered. A knock, perfectly timed. A cold gust of air brushing across my neck. A whisper, faint but unmistakable, threading through the walls like breath against my ear. Once I felt fingers graze my ankle beneath the blanket, light, tentative. I bolted upright, the blanket falling to the floor. No one was there. The room was empty. Yet the air was thick with the unmistakable sense of presence, as though someone had only just pulled away. The house wasn't just haunting me. It was touching me, claiming me. I tried to escape. I packed a bag, threw clothes and books into it with shaking hands. I made it as far as the porch before the air shifted. The street was too quiet. Every house across the road stood still, windows shut, curtains drawn. Not a light flickered, not a voice carried. And in that silence, the house behind me groaned. The sound was deep, guttural, like wood bending under weight, or like something exhaling. The bag slipped from my hand. I turned, staring at the windows that glowed faintly in the dark. They looked like eyes, watching, daring me to walk away. I didn't. I couldn't. I stepped back inside, the door closing with a heavy finality. The hum rose instantly, filling the air like a welcome. The house had let me know its will, and its will was simple. I would not leave. There comes a moment when fear twists into something sharper. Not courage, not quite, but desperation. The kind of desperation that leaves no room for retreat. I had lived too long with whispers and knocks, with humming that seeped into my dreams, with neighbors' silence pressing against me like another set of walls. I could not live with the unknown anymore. The house was keeping something, and I had to see it. I began to search in earnest. Every creak of floorboard, every flicker of light, every patch of peeling wallpaper became a clue. I carried the rusted key I'd found, running it across locks and drawers that no longer existed, as though it might guide me where my courage faltered. The writings on the wall echoed in my head. They never left. The smell grew unbearable, concentrated in certain places. The base of the stairs, the corner of the living room, the wall behind my bed. I pressed my face against the plaster, gagging on the stench, certain that if I clawed hard enough, I would find what had been hidden there. One night, I gathered tools from the shed, a hammer, a chisel, anything that could break through the skin of the house. My hands shook as I carried them inside, but my resolve did not. If the house wanted to keep its secret, it would have to fight me for it. I started in the hallway. The hammer struck the plaster with a sound that split the silence in two. Dust filled the air, thick and choking, as chunks of wall fell away. Behind them was nothing, only old studs and darkness. But the house responded. The humming rose to a deafening pitch, vibrating through the walls, through my bones. The lights flickered, flared, then died, plunging me into darkness. The smell poured out stronger, wrapping around me like hands. I dropped the hammer, clutching my ears, my eyes wide. "Show me!" I screamed. "Show me what you're hiding!" The knock came instantly, 3 sharp raps right behind me. I spun, breath ragged, staring into the darkness. My hand groped for the hammer, my knuckles white around the handle. The knock came again, slower this time, closer. I pressed the hammer against the wall, my pulse racing. I raised it high, ready to swing, and then a whisper. Low, fragile, just one word. "Stay." The hammer slipped from my fingers. I staggered back, trembling, the sound reverberating through me. The house had spoken before, through knocks, through humming, through air that chilled like breath. But this was different. This was unmistakably a voice. And it wasn't threatening me. It was pleading. The word clung to me. Stay. It circled through my mind as I sat on the stairs, my chest heaving, dust thick in my lungs. The house wasn't just warning me anymore, it wasn't just haunting me, it was asking. But why? I needed answers. The next morning I forced myself into the attic again. The bulb swung overhead, its light jittering across the beams. I pulled every box into the open, scattering their contents across the floor. Receipts, scraps of fabric, brittle letters. Nothing that spoke clearly, nothing that explained why the house held me. Until I found the journal. The leather cover was cracked, stiff with age, the pages yellowed and curled. Most of the writing was faded, but fragments remained, scrawled in a hurried hand. The noise is worse at night. Clara says she hears singing again. The smell won't leave no matter what I burn. My throat tightened. Clara. The name carved into the cupboard, the name whispered in my dreams. I turned the pages faster, desperate for more. We cannot move. They won't let us. The walls keep it. The final entry was short. Just one sentence, jagged with panic. It isn't the house that's haunted. It's us. The words blurred as my hands shook. I shoved the journal back into the box, but the meaning burned through me. Whatever was here, it wasn't just tied to wood and plaster. It was tied to people, to families, to anyone foolish enough to call this place home. That night I couldn't sit still. The air felt charged, alive, as though the house was waiting for me to move, to act. I carried the hammer again, tracing the walls where the smell pressed strongest. The base of the stairs, the corner of the living room, my bedroom wall. I pressed my ear against the plaster, my breath shallow. The humming swelled, soft and insistent, like a mother crooning to a child. "Clara," I whispered. "Are you here?" The reply came in a single, sharp knock. My hand trembled around the hammer. I lifted it high. This time, I didn't stop. The hammer struck hard, breaking through plaster and lath. Dust filled my throat, made my eyes sting. I struck again, tearing the wall open, clawing at the jagged edges with bleeding hands. And then the smell poured out, thick, choking, undeniable. Behind the wall was darkness, but not empty darkness. Bones. Pressed tight together, wedged between studs, fragments of clothing clinging like cobwebs. A skull tilted forward, its hollow eyes staring straight into mine. I stumbled back, gagging, the hammer clattering to the floor. The humming rose instantly, louder than ever, filling every corner of the house until the walls themselves seemed to vibrate. I fell to my knees, clutching my ears, choking on the smell, the sound, the truth. The house had shown me, and now I knew why it wanted me to stay. The sight of the bones would not leave me. They stared from the wall with hollow patience, as though they had been waiting all this time for someone to see them. The skull's empty eyes seemed to follow me as I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. The smell was everywhere, clinging to my skin, to my lungs, pressing into me until I could taste decay with every breath. I wanted to run, to flee the house, the street, the city. But the humming rose, wrapping around me, insistent and suffocating. The air itself seemed to close in, thick with voices that layered over one another, a chorus of whispers threading through the walls. Stay, stay, stay. I fell to my knees, covering my ears, rocking forward and back. "What do you want from me?" I screamed. The walls shook. The photographs on the table crashed to the floor, their glass shattering. The lights flared, then flickered out. In the darkness, I felt it, a weight pressing close. Cold fingers grazing my shoulders, my neck, my face. And then, softer than breath, a single word whispered against my ear. Remember. Images flooded me. The family from the photographs, Clara, her parents, her siblings. Their lives unraveling in this house. The humming that once soothed children into sleep, turning sour, twisted. The silence of neighbors who turned away. The house swallowing them, keeping them, holding them as it now held me. The bones weren't just remains, they were anchors, proof that the past had never left. I wept, clutching the floorboards, the voices swirling around me. They weren't only haunting me, they were pleading with me to remember them, to speak what no one else would. The neighbors' silence, the whispered warnings, the sidelong glances. It wasn't fear of me. It was fear of the house's truth, a truth they had buried along with the family, hoping time would smother it. But walls don't forget, and neither would I. The sun rose pale and thin the next morning, bleeding light across the ruins of my living room. Dust hung in the air, glittering like ash. The wall gaped open, bones jutting out like accusations. I sat among them, hollow, exhausted, but strangely certain. The house had chosen me not to be another secret it kept, but to be the one who could not look away. I gathered the photographs, the journal, the scraps of memory scattered through the attic. I laid them on the table beside the bones, piecing together the fragments of a life the house had tried to contain. And for the first time, the humming faded. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full, heavy with acknowledgement, with something almost like relief. The house had given me its secret. Now it was mine to carry. I stood on the porch as the street stirred awake. Curtains twitched, eyes watched from behind glass. No one spoke. No one asked. I looked back at the house, its windows glowing faintly in the morning light, and I understood. To live here was never about claiming a home. It was about inheriting a truth. And though every part of me longed to run, I knew I wouldn't. Because some stories refused to be left behind, and this one had claimed me.